Hey, it's Carl with a K. Let's talk about Hollywood. Hi everyone, this is Carl Gibson and welcome to episode 29 of the Let's Talk About Hollywood podcast. Thanks for being here. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. And if you've been here from the beginning, you know that we were together just 2 weeks ago and I said, I'll see you next week. And here it is 2 weeks later. So I apologize for that. I try to do a weekly cadence. I have to say, in relocating from Los Angeles to the Tampa Bay, Florida area, of course, I'm adjusting to a new city. Well, it's not really a new city because I used to live here when I was a teenager. More on that. There's plenty to come on that. But anyway, I am adjusting. I'm job hunting. And in putting the podcast together, I don't like to rush it, or if it's not together, I tend to wait. So when I was doing the podcast, when I started it, because the podcast is 5 months old, and this is episode 29, and I took a month-long hiatus. So I'd said that I'd be putting these episodes out pretty much every Wednesday. I'd like to say now, in 2026, I'm going to aim to put out a weekly episode by Thursday or Friday. And you'll know about it because if you're subscribing to the podcast, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, then you'll know that a new episode is in. And I also know that consistency is key because the way that we consume podcasts, you could be listening to this in a binge. You could be listening to this weeks from now where a gap doesn't matter. But if you follow the show from week to week, I know as a listener of podcasts myself, you'd like an episode to be in. So don't think that I'm not thinking about that. I'm going to aim for a weekly cadence of Thursday or Friday, which is different from the original Wednesday release schedule when I was in Los Angeles. So don't worry, I've got you. Thank you for being here, and thanks for coming back. I always appreciate you all, as you know. And all I can tell you right now is I know that the world is the world is in a very fraught pattern right now. That's an understatement. There's the U.S., Israel, Iran war conflict that's happening that is, we're in this world. I know that there are so many people that know people who live in all of these places or have served in these places. It affects all of us. It's distressing. It's tragic. I just think for me, again, as you know, with this podcast, I know that, with the political landscape out there, that I know that you can find those podcasts that speak to your political beliefs elsewhere. So I really try not to feed the algorithm, only because I find that it can be very divisive. Tomato, let's call the whole thing off. Anyway, I honestly know that politics can it's a loaded thing. And so I know that I don't know you as listeners. And so I just don't feed the algorithm just because this is not what the podcast is about. But at the same time, with a conflict that's affecting so much of the world happening right now, I just have to say, I am praying for this world. I am Gen X. So I remember vaguely the end of Vietnam. I was very early in elementary school, probably first grade, when the veterans started coming home from Vietnam. And you can be in the 70s, especially as a child of boomers, and not know the way that the war had affected their generation, as well as the boomers and the greatest generation before. And then I was a sophomore in college when the Persian Gulf War started. Then there was the Bosnian War, the Sierra Leone Civil War, Afghanistan, which went from 2001 to 2021, the Iraq War from 2003 to 2011, which I was in news. I wasn't covering it, but I was in news, and we had a Washington bureau, so we all covered and experienced that. The Syrian Civil War from 2011 to the present, the Yemeni Civil War from 2015 to the present, the war in Donbass and Ukraine from 2014 to the present, and now this. And all I'll say is, in the name of my grandfather who served in World War II, when we were kids, we could not play with guns. So cap guns, any kind of toy guns, water guns were out of the question. Couldn't do it. And he truly, truly had strong opinions about war. He literally knew that it was hell. My nanny, she used to leave food or leftovers that hadn't been eaten, of course, but she would make portions and she would cover them and she would put them on her back porch so that veterans could come around to the back of the house and not feel shamed and just be able to get a home cooked meal. And so and there's many more stories within my family and family members and friends who have served. And of course, I know that this has also affected your family and your friends over the course of time in history with wars. So I offer love, I offer prayers, I offer thanks, and I know so much of it is unimaginable to most of us. Again, I worked in news specifically for 12 years. I've heard stories from people all over the world, people who've had to flee their countries, people who have had loss, people who've had to start all over again, people who are scarred mentally, physically, and still try to love and still try to espouse peace and love through their great sacrifice. So all I can say is, as one person, that I am praying for our troops, and like all of us, hopefully this can be over. And I know that can be naive, but I just want to say, I'm not in a bubble. Of course, I'm like you. And I know that we all are in different parts of the world. And so I pray that you're safe. And that's just what I wanted to say. I know it's not deep. I wasn't trying to, of course, step out of my lane of this podcast, but at the same time, acknowledge that I know we're in a very fraught time in the world. So God bless us all. And once again, I want to thank you for being here. If you're listening to this podcast, if you've been with this podcast from the beginning, you know that I appreciate and love you. And if you're new to the podcast, this is an audio memoir. It's about Hollywood starting back in 2001 when my career began, first in news, and then as it goes through the studio system and different pivots. And it's for people who care about Hollywood or care about art, care about creatives, care about stories, characters, takeaways. And I frame it through not only what was going on as far as in the industry, but also what I was experiencing as a person who was at the top echelons of it, but also trying to have a regular life. So living in A-list constructs with a middle class lifestyle. It was me, my husband Bebbles Stone, so I call him Bebbles or Stone. Stone was his last name. Bebbles was his nickname, and what was going on at the time. And so we're back. This episode will be going back to the journals. This will be going back to 2002. This is during my first year at the Hollywood Reporter, which was an $80 million magazine at the time and came out every single day. The Hollywood Reporter, of course, still exists. It doesn't come out every day, but it is still an institution of the industry. And as I say about Hollywood, Hollywood really is more of a psychology and a mindset than a physical place, even though it is that. It's just very subjective. It just depends on what your goal is and what you're doing. And so that's what the podcast is about. I want to thank listeners who, for the last episode, the top 7 countries for listeners and downloads were the United States, Spain, France, Finland, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Singapore. So thank you for listening. I hope that you continue to. I hope you subscribe. You can always feel free to rate the podcast in the Apple iTunes store or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast runs on donations. It will always be free. So there's never going to be like a Patreon or exclusive episodes. Nothing against that or podcast creators who operate on that model. For me, it's simpler to do donations, optional donations, and no amount is too small. So if you'd like to donate, you can click the links in the show notes, or you can go to www.letstalkabouthollywood.com/support. It's that easy. And I appreciate it. And I will thank you on the show. And thank you for all that you all do as far as listening and supporting this and making me a very small part of your day or evening. And so we'll get into the podcast now. The episode where we last left off is I had gone to my first Black Hollywood party. And Black Hollywood, of course, there's Hollywood. And then there's Black Hollywood, of course. And I had gone to this party that was being thrown by this comedian who is still active today. He did, many TV series. He did stand-up. He was considered a pretty much warm and pleasant guy, which he is not. He's not. He is not. But he is called in this episode and last episode and other episodes to come. This isn't the last of him. I'm calling him Augustus Meep, Meep. And as I said in the last episode, the Meep is based on Roadrunner. Meep, 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 which is nonsensical because that's kind of how he was. But more than that, this was really just about my first foray into this party. It was one of the first parties that I had been invited to as a guest, not to cover it when I was at the Hollywood Reporter. And mind you, I'm an editorial assistant at this time. And so that's where we're going to pick up. This is episode 29, and it's called You're the Golden Child. It Doesn't Matter. This is 2002 summer. After meeting Earth, Wind, and Fire, Janet, Augustus Meep's PR head, saw me from the glass press room office and caught my eye. Janet came out of the enclosure and asked me, point blank, "So, what kind of coverage can we expect from this in our paper tomorrow? I mean, I just need to know for Augustus. Do you have anything to ask him? Any questions?" I said, "What?" I'm glad Nigel went to the restroom because I'd just gotten a third drink. No buzz, just mellow, and I could see that I was going to have to get a couple of things straight with Janet right quick, but in a calm way. She just zeroed in on me and wanted an answer, and I was not there to sing for my supper. I'm not a reporter, and I didn't see anyone else from the press having to work the party and guarantee placement for Augustus. I broke it down evenly by saying to her, "I'm not here to cover the party, Janet. I don't have any questions for Augustus. Now, if you'd like to give me a press package with materials, I will surely forward it. That's what I can do. Forward the promo stuff to the newsroom. Janet said, "So basically, you'll go to work tomorrow and tell them about the party, and then what?" Well, telling them about the party is not going to get it placed, but at least a press package would explain the reason for this event and what Augustus is trying to branch out into, I replied, leaning in as the crowd noise heightened. "So what do I tell Augustus?" Janet asked me point blank. I said, "You can tell Augustus that I have looked out for him all year long. I think that will do." I saw it as the most logical and truthful answer to end the conversation. I was a little unnerved by the work angle. I mean, I know it's a party, and it's part and parcel of the party scene, but no one else was being asked to jump through hoops, and I'm no exception. I've helped Black Hollywood from the NAACP to Bernie Mac, and actors and talent and crew. This was my first Black Hollywood party as an industry guest or worker, and I wasn't going to have the pressure. The look of the crowd was as follows. The brothers were wearing either close-cut fades, or they were bald, or regal, with braids or twists, with linen pants and sandals. The women were sporting the Girlfriends look from the TV show Girlfriends, loose curled hairstyles, moderately long and natural, or they were wearing the Destiny's Child look, lots of honey blondes, short flips, and shags. I was approached by a petite and sweet-looking sister with long hair and a nice smile. She said, "I've seen everybody shaking your hand all night, and so I figured I should too." We told each other our industry roles. She's a radio disc jockey in a small market and an inspiring actress. She gave me her card. Another guest asked me if I could do a story on her best friend, who was the first Black woman to win Survivor, now in its 5th season on CBS, and she's not getting enough publicity from the press, which takes public relations. Arnell Simpson, Grecian and voluptuous, sauntered past, and Nigel stopped her and said hello. She turned to me and rubbed my arm like I was a big lug and said, "Hey, Carl." She has all of the class and down-to-earth warmth that sets her apart, so it's good to see she's not a pariah in the community as O.J. Simpson's daughter. She's treated nicely and is a real vivacious girl. I went back to touch base with Janet after our last exchange, just so she knew I wasn't being a hard ass or inaccessible. Janet got my attention and put me right in the doorway of the press room, saying, "Augustus Meep is coming out, and I want him to at least see your face and know who you are, baby." I said, "Fine." Augustus came out, and I have to say, it was a very underwhelming experience. The fleshy exuberance of his face, which is only noticeable when he smiles, is as practiced as a news anchor's. In repose, his face is disarmingly thin, and his lips slack like he's in delayed shock. He's tall, and his clothes do all the work. He is absolutely humorous, and as serious as a congressman. He walked slowly, and Janet introduced us. Augustus said, "How you doing?" in a low, hard-to-hear voice, and wouldn't look at me. He said all of this, staring straight at the venue carpet, his hand limp in mine, and cold. I left it at that. I said nothing else because he was too dreary to imagine talking to. This man has run multiple shows of his own, and his staff gets him from point A to B to C. He looked like a zombie. 2 minutes later, a camera crew with a well-known entertainment show host asked Augustus a question, and there he was, in the camera light, animated, cutting up and showing his molars. It was now around 11 p.m., and Augustus had the multiple bar areas go to cash bars. I bought another drink. The actor, Stephen Williams, who played Captain Adam Fuller in the 21 Jump Street series, came over. He made his name as a stage actor in Chicago, which I remembered. Stephen was very effusive, and the guys who came up to hang around him were at least 20 years younger and nervous in their awe of him. He was very nice to meet. I met Ernest Thomas, who played Raj on What's Happening. He's 53 years old, and he looks 40. He has a mustache now. I gave him his props. I never missed that show as a kid, and he shook my hand. He's very pleasant and a down-to-earth fellow. Verdine White, the bassist from Earth, Wind & Fire who I'd met earlier, came over, grabbed me by my wrist, and playfully pulled me out to the open deck, saying he wanted me to meet somebody. That somebody was co-lead singer of the group Earth, Wind & Fire, Philip Bailey. Verdine said to him, "This is Carl Gibson from Daily Variety." Yikes. Wrong magazine. That sucked, but I didn't bother to correct him. Philip looked at me with a glazed, somewhat patronizing expression, almost like he's been complimented on his vocals, on Reasons, or Devotion for the past 30 years, and there's nothing more to say. I complimented him on his song Children of the Ghetto and said it got me through my college years. We shook hands and I kept our meeting brief. It was nice of Verdine, though. It was getting close to the time for me to go home, and I went to say goodnight to Janet. She was unwinding in the green room with other guests. She asked me to sit down so we could really talk. She offered Nigel a seat, and we all lounged and caught our breath for a second. Janet told us her age, and she could pass for 20 years younger, naturally. She said it was nice to meet me, and that she was curious why I hadn't been at the last huge Black Hollywood Awards shows this year. I told her that I'm rarely invited by the Black organizations to anything, although they invite the salespeople at the Hollywood Reporter's advertising department all the time. I told her the truth, that I either don't get invited or informed, and she was livid. Janet really went on a tangent about, "No, that's not right. Not even the Soul Train Awards? All the stuff you do?" I said no. She must have said, "Don't play with me. Don't play with me," several times, then declared, "That's all going to change after tonight, baby. I'm not playing. This is ridiculous. Here we have you, a brother who can move releases and press, and it's idiotic for them to sleep on you like that. I am so sorry, but trust me, I will be on the phone tomorrow with everybody telling them about you. You think I'm playing, but you may get more calls than you can handle." Nigel interrupted her. He stutters when he's fervent, and he said, "That's right, Janet. Carl, that's your black link right there. That's your black link." Janet said, "Okay, we have to stick together in this business. I was just supposed to work with Augustus on one project and go back to my own company, but he kept me on. It's about relationships, baby, and I want to call you in this morning, sweetheart." Janet was so angry for me and so fervent that I kissed her hand as a gentlemanly touch because she was singing my life with her words. So if that could happen, if my profile could raise and I be able to attend these news events, that would be great. Janet knows that I'm the only Black newsroom person at the main newsroom of the Hollywood Reporter. I'm not a reporter, but I do have a lot of influence because I know who all these people are. It will be great if I get some leads. I appreciated it. Sunday, July 7th, 2002. I'm in the newsroom with about an hour left on the clock, tired as all hell on 5.5 hours sleep. Payroll is due today and a host of other accounting duties. I can't take a day off tomorrow since my editorial assistant partner would have to work alone since our boss is on vacation for 2 more weeks, and the newsroom has been extraordinarily busy for this time of year. Our parent company has a post-9/11 no-temp policy. No-temp Bareri workers are allowed, even though we gave $250 million to relief efforts. I threw a party for Stone yesterday, and he enjoyed it immensely. I was so happy, and there was no circumstantial brouhaha going on. Stone talked long distance to Mom and my sister Ellie. He got music equipment and a camera. His friend Dennis took home movies, and I didn't appear in that footage because I wanted it to be about Stone's celebration. Stone asked me to come dance while Dennis filmed the dance floor, and I said no. I was wearing a ponytail and very basic. That's just how I felt, like I was holding myself together with spit and paste. I didn't want any filmed record of me being tired with nonstop work and real-life logistics. Nigel came with wine for Stone and a personalized mix CD of all of Stone's favorite songs from their club days at the Executive Suite in Long Beach and the Catch One on Pico Boulevard. Stone barbecued later. Nigel ate 3 plates, while Dennis ate and ran. Stone also barbecued ribs, chicken breasts, and made potato salad. We had drinks on the balcony beforehand, and it was cool. Stone had hoped that Dennis and Nigel, who were meeting for the first time, might be a love connection. They weren't. I'm assuming this was because of the exchange they had earlier. Dennis is Costa Rican and speaks with a beautiful and rich accent, and he launched into an 8-minute speech about Costa Rica's universal health care and politics. When Nigel countered something about the political diaspora, Dennis raised his hand mildly, as if to end the topic, and said, "That is why I don't like talking about politics or religion." "Me either," Nigel said pointedly. Later, Nigel said, "Carl, I see control issues there." I think Nigel meant that Dennis is too much of a Hispanic, bossy type in his opinion. I didn't pick up on that with Dennis, but the two of them didn't really click, although they did seem to enjoy a lot of talking when they were alone. After dinner, Dennis left, which Nigel thought was a little bogus, and Stone didn't appreciate it much either. I said to Stone and Nigel, "It wasn't like Dennis and Nigel were hitting it off, so why do y'all care that he had to leave? He was a nice guest. He's your friend, Stone, and he didn't know you'd be here, Nigel. Besides, maybe Dennis is still pining for his ex, who's in his early 20s. 3 hours had passed, so we went to the bar in Hollywood, The Study, where I met Stone for the first time 3 years ago. We got a table, and later, a brother with salt and pepper hair came up to us and said hi to me. I had never seen him before. He said his name was Kenneth, and he spoke to me with a beaming smile and ultra-smooth delivery. I was in the corner of the booth, just trying to chill. I said a pleasant, "Nice to meet you. Have a nice evening." Stone was looking at Kenneth with some suspicion. Kenneth then said to me, "You are just a gorgeous man," while he leaned across our table and put his hand out near my face and made a sweeping motion towards my goatee and said, "I love all of this." Nigel stuttered at Kenneth. You shouldn't do that." Kenneth leaned a little farther when Stone said all of a sudden, "Oh, nah," and snatched Kenneth's arm and said, "That's enough of that. He's with me." Nigel put his drink down and said to Kenneth, "That's not cool. You need to move away from the table. Have some respect for people." Kenneth turned to Stone with a big smile and said, "Oh, he's your husband?" Stone replied, "That's right, and you need to step back. We're not even fitting to play all that." Kenneth said, "You're fine too," and put his hand on Stone's shoulder. Stone grabbed his wrist and flung it off, and that was the end of Kenneth. I just sighed while Nigel and Stone looked at each other, like, can you believe that? I was just wondering, is this really my life? Not out of pity, more from fatigue. I'm having a drink. The one time me and Stone go out to celebrate, I get hit on and a bar brawl almost ensues. I said to Nigel, "I've got a hat on. I'm in the corner. What's there to see?" Nigel said, "You're the golden child. It doesn't matter. You're near the light too, and your face is showing." Nigel patted my shoulder, and that made me laugh. Stone was cool, but he went to go smoke a cigarette. I followed, and we had a nice time for the rest of the night. We got home, just the two of us after midnight, and stayed up talking and chilling to music. This is life in the fast lane for now. Okay, that's the end of that entry. And that's summer of 2002 we're leaving off in. And my recap. Well, first of all, Augustus Meep, he will come up again. Oh, yes, he will. I don't think soon, but he'll come up again, and so will Janet. And that was not as pleasant an exchange, but you'll hear how that all went down. Again, it was fun looking back at that, because I do remember that really was my first entree into Black Hollywood. And what Janet said as far as, doing this phone call blast and getting me on everybody's radar, that didn't really happen. However, it did happen just as I was at the Hollywood Reporter longer, had my own contacts, started meeting people at our parties. I mean, because they would all be at our parties or at events or premieres, and I got to shake hands and meet them myself. So I didn't really necessarily need her help. It would have been great. I remember thinking like, wow, this would be awesome if I was on the radar of more Black publicists and able to cover more events, because the Hollywood Reporter had limited coverage, just period. because at any given time, there were 10, 15 things happening in Hollywood and only so many reporters and event coverage. So I was able to do a lot of it along with other people there, separately, sometimes together, but that would be later. But as far as being an editorial assistant, it was really intense, and I really, really loved it. And meeting Earth, Wind, and Fire was great. Verdine White introducing me to Philip Bailey. Like I said, Philip Bailey did not like me. I think that's fair to say, and that's okay. And I didn't ask to be introduced to him, so I'm sure he just felt like, oh, another person complimenting me, and that happens sometimes with iconic singers who get complimented for the same thing all the time. I certainly like Philip Bailey's voice, but I'm just saying, as far as conversation, I would have talked to Verdine, the bassist, or the drummer. There were just other people in Earth, Wind, and Fire I would have talked to, but it was nice of him to do. And then I couldn't correct Verdine when he said Carl's from Daily Variety, which was our biggest competitor, So I was like, damn. But hey, I didn't correct him. It's like, I'll get over it. The party that I threw for Stone, that was nice to remember. I do remember that evening. I sure remember that Dennis and Nigel didn't hit it off, as I said in the entry. And I don't know that we saw Dennis that much. So Dennis from Costa Rica, wherever you are, I hope you're having fun. We were all in our early 30s. And so I know that Dennis at the time was dating someone in their early 20s. And so, that's always a little fraught, like when there's an age difference like that. I mean, it's all legal, but I'm just saying, like, what does a 22-year-old have in common with a 32-year-old at that time? Don't come for me, people. I think, a 10-year age difference now is quaint, but it's not something I would do. Well, I would date 10 years if they were 10 years older than me. Yeah. Cause like I said, I like to be the younger one. That way, when you fuck up, or if you get, if you just act up a little, or you're a little, argumentative or whatever, then they end up, like, okay, you're younger, and they let it pass, and it's not as intense. It's a learning moment. I say facetiously, but kind of not facetiously. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, it was nice to remember that party. And then I do remember that whole scene at the study at the bar, because Stone, he really wasn't that reactive to people, but he just didn't like people touching me. He didn't like people disrespecting him. I wasn't encouraging it. I was in the back of this booth. I'm the type of person who, like I had said to this guy, Kenneth, I'd said, nice to meet you. Have a good evening. And I thought that was it. But then he lingered, of course. And I'm glad that Stone didn't go off, because I'd seen Stone get pretty upset before. But, Stone and I had been together 3 years at that time. And so when we first got together, of course, having been in club culture and all of that stuff, there were people that knew me and would come up and hug me, or, they give you a kiss on the cheek, just from the party days. And Stone was pretty good about that. There were just a couple of dudes I would have to say, like, don't hug me too long. He's not going to like that. And of course, I was respectful, so that was a nice memory. Throwing a party for Stone. He deserved it. So yeah, at this time, I'm still an editorial assistant. Things are still coming together. There's going to be, at the same time, Stone and I were trying to move, which is going to happen. And where we moved is where I just left 23 years later. Yep. So when I moved away, when I came to LA, and I'll get more into that, of course, when the time comes, but there was a really big part of me that, as the apartment got more empty and I was donating things. I remember just looking at the space and seeing this was a different dream. That was Stone's dream with me. And of course, after he died, I kept it going. And of course, it changed. I didn't leave it like a shrine. But it was really never the same. And as things started getting harder in the industry, and I'm putting out hundreds of resumes with current shows and still couldn't get any bites, it was very evident to me that I need to have new dreams. Not that any of that was holding me back, but I almost could feel Bebbles in the space. Like, you don't have to stay here. You can do something else, or you can do what you love somewhere else. And as I said in the episode called "Thank You, Bebbles Stone" from season 1, he'd always been very adamant about me finding love again. So he was never going to be down with that kind of darkness that I could feel, just with the industry changing and with it being so hard to get a job, and still hard to get a job, even with current shows on. Like I think I've told you all, Wonder Man was one of the last shows that I worked on. And as of 2 weeks ago, it had 618 million minutes that people watched. And then in March of this year, I'd say like in 3 weeks, Daredevil Born Again season 2 will be out. And I worked on that too. So I'm still trying to, work that window. And of course, I know how to launch shows. I know how to work on shows. And this podcast came out of me wanting to do my own on a smaller niche level, because of course I know how to do the studio tent poles. So this is a nice switch for me. And also in my old apartment, besides all of that angst, I'd also, as I've told you all, lost another partner. And this was 17 years later. So I haven't even really discussed that. And so, losing 2 partners in the space of 17 years was intense. And on top of what I was going through professionally, it really felt like, okay, there's other things that I want to do, and there is love that I want to have. And it's not that it's not available in Los Angeles. It was just that I was so unhappy. I was just very unhappy and dealing with a lot of sadness. And thank goodness it never affected my work, because I always feel that the things that I do in Hollywood are in advocacy for the audience. Because again, I always go back to, how is the audience different from me? They've lost a spouse, or they've dealt with grief. They've dealt with unemployment. They've dealt with all kinds of challenges. And how am I different? And I can be on their side, because I know that when they're taking time out to settle in and watch a show and forget some of this, some of their problems, then I know that I can give them the best experience. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. So thank you for listening to this episode. I'll be back with episode 30. Yep, we'll be at episode 30, and that will be next time. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Come back. I appreciate you. You can always reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, Carl with a K, Gibson. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X, but I don't really use X a lot, to tell you the truth. But I'm there. And you also can reach out to me directly by email at studioexeccarl@gmail.com. That's studio, EXECKARL@gmail.com. Have a great weekend. I know it's coming up. Thank you again for all that you have meant to me and mean to me. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. And please know, as always, love is real, and I wish you all great things. See you next time.